NFL Showdown might be the single most fun way to play and sweat DFS, but 90% of the field in these contests is attacking them the wrong way. My name's Jordan Chand, I'm the head coach here at SaberSim, and in this video, I'm going to show you the secret to crushing your NFL Showdown DFS contest this season. Let's go ahead and dive right in. In our previous video in our NFL 2023 series, you learned the best way to select your NFL DFS contest this season, and if you missed that video, it's linked in the description of this one. But let's go ahead and talk about NFL DFS Showdown strategy. So what is the fundamental goal of NFL Showdown here? Well, ultimately it comes down to game scripts. That is the play-by-play story of how a game plays out. To beat NFL Showdown, you cannot worry about average projections. These games are only played one time, and we need to know what can actually happen in the actual game as it happens play by play. When one player does well in a particular game script, what other players are likely to perform well? Can different combinations of players on the same team or on the opposing teams all perform well in the same game? And what combinations of players are most likely to succeed in these different game scripts? What does a lineup that wins when the game shoots out looks like? What does it look like when it becomes a defensive grind fest? What does it look like when it's a blowout? These are all the important questions that you have to ask and answer to be successful in NFL Showdown. And on an NFL main slate, which we'll cover more in detail in our next video here, this stuff still matters, but your game scripts become a little bit more like cliff notes. This stuff still matters, but it's more on a macro level where you're focusing broadly on what players are generally correlated to one another, and you're trying to stack up your lineups. In a showdown, your lineups and your game scripts need to be extremely precise, picking up on each player you need to make the optimal lineup for the way that a game can play out. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is come up with the full range of the ways that a game could play out and build each optimal for those particular scripts. And this is really what makes Showdown really fun. You get to actually think through the way that you think the game is going to play out. But where average projections can be generally thought of as misleading for NFL main slates, they are downright dangerous to use for showdowns because they don't help you whatsoever with assembling these optimal lineups for different game scripts. And this is, of course, where SaberSim comes in, but understanding the theory behind what SaberSim is doing is absolutely crucial to using it effectively as a tool to build your lineups. We're not just providing average projections or just trying to scale a set of simulations based on an average projection. We are actually simulating out these games, play by play, thousands of times, writing out each possible game script of the way that a game could play out. You can think about this as a more sophisticated Madden sim. We simulate out the games where things turn into a defensive grind, where they're a shootout, where it's a blowout, and underdog upsets, and everything in between, all of the different ways that this game could possibly play out. And from there, we calculate full ranges of outcomes and correlation data for players, which you can see here for Amon-Ra St. Brown for the opening night. When you go to actually build your lineups on SaberSim, each lineup is an optimal lineup for one of these game scripts. So in this particular case, and we'll show this in a second, I would be building 5,000 optimals for a given way that the game could play out. Average projections, on the other hand, do not build lineups that are optimal for any given game script, and if they do, it's by pure luck. They're just optimizing based on what is likely to score the highest points on average. And you can actually generally see it. If you've built lineups for an NFL Showdown on a traditional optimizer ever, you're probably familiar with the fact that these don't look very good. But on SaberSim, you can quickly do that here. I ran a quick build on our optimizer mode setting, which is used for cash builds, and I'm just sorting by the top projected lineups here. I mean, the first lineup that jumps out here is a Patrick Mahomes captain, and then a bunch of cheaper Lions pieces here that are all projected pretty well to bring the lineup together. And it doesn't take a lot of investigative work here to see why this lineup is probably not very effective as a GPP lineup. With traditional optimizers and average projections, to turn your build into something that resembles a competitive set of lineups, you'll have to do a ton of extra work to not only think of and come up with as close as you can get to the full range of outcomes of a game, but then you have to do all the work on the optimizer side to program all the rules and groups to try to get close to what the lineups might look like that are optimal when those particular game scripts play out. And at best, you have to spend a ton of time and basically become an expert in this, and you're still only going to be left with educated guesses that those lineups resemble the actual optimals for particular game scripts. And at worst, you're going to be playing either terrible cash optimal lineups here, optimal in that case meaning the highest average projected lineups that just aren't good for GPPs, or you'll play lineups that have no chance to actually win, that really there's no game script where those lineups are optimal. So that's enough theory, but it's important to understand the basis of what's going on here and why simulations are such an improvement over average projections before we really touch anything in the app. But let's go ahead and start building some lineups and talk about what this process actually looks like here on SaberSim. We're going to be doing what I call a single build approach here to start with, which means we're going to be building a single pool of lineups to make all of our game scripts and ultimately use those lineups to enter our contests here. And the most important thing before you get started, especially for NFL Showdown, is really to just not touch anything to start with. There's a ton of ways to make adjustments here after we've built our lineups and pick what game scripts we want to target, but making a ton of adjustments up front, whether that's with exposures or lineup rules or curating your player pool, reduces the ability of SaberSim to find and build those optimal lineups for different game scripts. So I'm going to start here by just making two very small adjustments to abide by the DraftKings compliance rules here, and otherwise start building lineups. And what this is going to do is, behind the scenes, this is building 5,000 sim optimal lineups. We're going into our database of simulations for this game, and for 5,000 different sims, building the best possible lineup that you could possibly build if that particular game script plays out. On the other side of this build, we'll be able to review these lineups, see if it lines up with our overall strategy and approach we wanted to take on the slate, and make adjustments to figure out what game scripts we actually want to target. Now that we've got our build here, let's talk about a few things right off the bat. So what has actually happened here is, in theory, this build is for a 20 max contest that I'm going to be playing on this particular slate. I've built 20 lineups, but we're working with a pool of 5,000 lineups that, again, are all single simulation optimals here. So we have this pool of a bunch of viable different game scripts we can use to attack this slate, to change our strategy or pick certain lineups out of there that we want to target. We're also sorting these lineups in a really powerful way. We're using SaberScore, our single game SaberScore here, to sort these lineups based on how often they're appearing as the optimal lineup in our simulations, and also their projection and their ownership. So we're picking GPP ready lineups here based on those particular factors and sorting them out of the pool here. And right off the bat, you're generally going to see lineups that make quite a bit more sense in terms of creating a game script that is likely to win here. We've got the Chiefs Onslaught here as our second lineup here. We've got a nice game that maybe looks like it's going to be a little bit more of a competitive game where we get Mahomes, Pacheco, and St. Brown and 4 lines total here. And just studying these lineups, you're generally going to see lineups that look a little bit better right off the bat. But where you should be spending most of your time is on the left-hand side in the player tables, studying the exposures that you're getting to particular players here and making sure it lines up with the way that you want to attack the slate. You should be filling in here with high-level takes or stands that you have about this particular game and letting SaberSim fill in the small details of making up each individual lineup using the power of our sim optimals. There's a couple useful features here in terms of reviewing these lineups effectively, and they start with these 3 columns here: exposure, pool, and leverage. Your exposure is going to show you what percentage of your lineups in your set contain a particular player at either the captain or the flex. Your pool exposure is going to show you what percentage of lineups in your entire pool of 5,000 sim optimals here contain a particular player. And your leverage is your exposure to a player minus the ownership of that player, showing you how much over or under the field you are on a particular player. These things are very useful here for getting a quick glance on the angle that SaberSim would take on this particular slate. Another useful tool for reviewing are these filters over here on the left-hand side, the plus and minus magnifying glasses. If we want to see, for example, what lineups where Jared Goff is the optimal captain look like in our sims, we can filter this here and review these lineups and make sure that they make sense for us here. You'll see right off the bat that because these are built from single game simulations, they're going to make a lot more sense than they would if you just said lock Jared Goff into a traditional optimizer with average projections. In these lineups, we're getting the pass catchers here that you would expect to see in these builds. Our fourth one here is kind of more of a Lions Onslaught type build, which is an interesting angle for this particular slate, and these builds should just in general make a lot more sense. In terms of what you're actually doing here, your goal should be to make adjustments to player exposures or your player pool here to try to figure out what game scripts you want more or less of, whether that be because you think a particular game script is more or less likely to happen than SaberSim does by default here, or because you want to differentiate and you want to play a game script that you think the field is going to undervalue in your particular contests. Remember, your pool of 5,000 lineups is going to cover nearly the full breadth of the range of outcomes for this particular slate. So regardless of what you're seeing in your exposures when you first start building, you've got a lot of flexibility to target those particular game scripts that you're looking for. So let me give you a quick demo of what this actually might look like. I think this first game, opening night for the regular season here, is a particularly interesting one, and a couple trends that I'm seeing in my research leading up to this game make me want to play an angle where I'm a little heavier on the Lions. I think we're seeing a lot of the public betting money and just a lot of the interest in general on the Chiefs side of this game. I think the perception is that the Chiefs are going to win this game easily, and I'm going to play an angle here where the Lions are competitive or maybe even have a decent shot to win this game because I don't think that's going to be a very popular direction. So, for example, a couple ways I might do that is starting to limit my captain pool. I'm going to assume that it is a Lions captain that takes it down here for this particular game. So I'm going to start removing some of the Chiefs captains from my pool. One particular setting that can be useful for you here is in the upper right in the settings menu, turning auto apply exposures on. I like to have that on because I want to see the impact of my changes immediately on my lineups. So I'm going to just start removing here different Chiefs captains from my pool and focus more on the Lions side of this particular game. So we'll just uncheck these different captains here and we will see the impact that that has on our lineups here on the other side. Okay, so we've settled down into here 5 Lions captains here. St. Brown, Goff, Montgomery, Gibbs, and Khalif Raymond. And now what I'm going to do is just take a look and see what was the overall impact of that on my lineups. I want to make sure that this particular angle makes sense. And again, what's happening here is we're going through the pool of 5,000 lineups to find the best 20 single game sim optimals where a Lion is the optimal captain here. And this is an improvement on an optimizer where you just say X out all of the Chiefs captains here, because what that's going to do is build the highest projected average lineups with just Lions captains. What we're doing is actually building out the most likely to be optimal Lions captains lineups. So I can take a look through here and make sure that these lineups make sense. If I'm not happy with a particular build, I can just delete it from my pool here and add in another lineup from my set and get rid of a particular lineup. I can also take a look at my other exposures and make sure they're adding up here. For example, maybe something that I'm thinking about is maybe I don't want to play any situations where it's a Lions captain, but it doesn't have Mahomes in it, right? Because then I'm basically full fading Mahomes. I could go in here and say, I'm going to basically lock in Mahomes into these builds. Now I want to go back and double check and make sure that it's still adding up here on my captain's pool. So now we have Marquez Valdez-Scantling showing up as a captain. I'm going to remove him here. And I'm slowly narrowing in and iterating on my process here to make sure that my lineups match up with my particular angle on the slate, which in this case is Lions win, or a Lion is a optimal captain here, but Mahomes is optimal in the flex position. Now, it doesn't have to be all or nothing with just locking in or Xing out particular players either. Another angle I think is interesting on this slate is favoring David Montgomery over Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs is a rookie. The Lions signed David Montgomery in the offseason here, and we saw Jamal Williams be a really effective goal line back for them last year, which I think is what Montgomery is going to be for them this season. There's a lot of hype around Jahmyr Gibbs this season, but I think it's going to take a little while for him to really find his role in this offense, so I'm going to favor David Montgomery a little more than Jahmyr Gibbs. I want to make sure I'm double the field on Montgomery in the flex spot, and I'm half the field on Gibbs in the flex spot. So to do that, I'm just going to set a minimum exposure. We're expecting Montgomery in about, they're actually expecting both of them in about 25% of lineups. So I'm going to set Montgomery equal to a 50% min exposure here, and I'm going to find Gibbs here, and I'm going to set him to a max exposure of 10%. And I'm actually going to do that for the captains as well. I want to make sure I'm getting some exposure to Montgomery as the captain. We expect him to be in about 10% of lineups. I'm going to make sure he's showing up as my optimal captain in 10%. 5% versus 10%. And I'm also going to cap Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm actually going to remove Jahmyr Gibbs as the optimal captain. Again, I want to play an angle where David Montgomery is the more effective running back for this particular slate. And as we've been going step by step here, my lineups are getting more dialed into my particular angle on the slate. We're pulling in these optimal lineups here from our pool of 5,000 that match up with this angle where David Montgomery is the more effective running back. It is a Lion as the optimal captain, and the Lions are generally effective in this game. And Mahomes is in the flex spot in every lineup here just because of his raw projection and what I think he can do on the other side in these lineups. And that's not to say that this is the right answer for this particular slate. And by the time this game comes and goes, my goal is that this video is still effective for you in other showdowns later in this season. What you should be doing in this step is looking at your lineups, figuring out what angle do you want to play? What do you think are the likely outcomes for this game? Or what do you think are the outcomes that the field is underappreciating? And make adjustments to your player pool and your exposures to account for that. Again, the reason why we didn't do any of this beforehand is, one, it's useful to see what does SaberSim think is going to happen on this particular slate. What are the angles that SaberSim likes? But also, now that we're making these adjustments after the build has completed here, we're not forcing the optimizer to abide by this. We're saying, give me the best lineups possible where this is the slate outcome that takes place. So now that we're happy with our overall direction and the look and feel of our lineups, we're ready to enter them into our contests. And I have a full tutorial walking through this part of the process, but I'll quickly show you how easy it is to get your lineups from SaberSim entered into DraftKings. The first thing I'll do is click the save icon here to save these lineups to my contest, and I need to upload an entries file. I'll click download template file from DraftKings to quickly get my entries file for this slate and just drag and drop it over into SaberSim here. I've got a couple entries into the Millie Maker that were given to me from free tickets, but mostly I'm focusing on this $1.20 max. I'll go ahead and just click Save to Contests. I'm going to duplicate here because I'm going to play two of those same lineups into the Millie Maker, and you'll see this green button flash here. I'll go ahead and just click that, download a new entries file, and open DraftKings where I can get that entries file uploaded back to DK. So that's the basic process for using SaberSim effectively to build winning NFL Showdown lineups this season. But before we go, I want to touch briefly on our contest sims, which are a great way to take the next step with your NFL Showdown process. When you run a contest sim, what we'll actually be doing is taking each lineup in your pool of 5,000 here and simulating it in a proxy contest that resembles the contest that you're actually going to play on the slate and directly calculate the expected ROI of each of your lineups in your pool. This becomes a great sorting method and an improvement over the SaberScore scoring method to quickly identify the best possible lineups from your pool to play. To run a contest sim after building your lineups, you'll go back to the settings menu here and under contest sim settings, click add contest sims. I like to give it a name that is the contest that I'm particularly playing in this case. And for field lineups, you'll just want to stick to the SaberSim ownership field lineups here, which are going to use the lineups that we actually built to generate our ownership projections as your hypothetical field for this contest. Under here, you'll set the settings that match up to the contest you're playing. And we've got these stored here under the contest tab under all contests. So I can see that the first down here has about 178,000 entries, giant NFL contest here, and it pays 5% to first and 26% of the field gets paid out. So under the build here, we'll go ahead and add that information in my contest sim settings here. So we'll add this back, $1.20 max. And this is about 178,000 entries here, paying out 5% to first, paying out 26% of the field. And I'm going to run 100,000 simulations of this particular contest. Once I've got those settings saved, I can go back to my lineups here and click Run Contest Sim. Now that our contest sim is finished, we'll just want to change our sorting method for this particular build. So we'll change this from single game SaberScore to the risk-adjusted ROI of these lineups in our simulations here. And what we're going to do now is sort these lineups based on how well they performed in our actual simulations in the contest sim here. And at this point, this just becomes a more effective sorting method than SaberScore. SaberScore is still going to be a big improvement over projected score because it's taking into account how often lineups are optimal in our sims and what their upside is, but the ROI is just a true, accurate depiction of what lineups are most likely to perform in our simulations. It's still worth going through the rest of the process here. Find a unique angle for your particular build on the slate, and your qualitative research in this step is still very helpful in terms of differentiating you and adding value to the process. But the contest sims are going to give you a very precise and accurate view of what lineups we expect to be most profitable on that particular slate. And that's it. Those are the fundamentals of what it takes to be successful playing NFL DFS Showdown this season. Remember, ultimately, Showdown strategy is about figuring out the game scripts that are possible and the range of outcomes of possible outcomes for that game. Building the optimal lineups for those individual game scripts, which are exactly what SaberSim helps you with. From there, you just want to target what game scripts you think are going to be the most profitable ways to play that particular slate and make adjustments to your build accordingly. If you have any other questions for us, you can always reach out to us in our Discord server or by emailing us at support@sabersim.com. And we're offering a free 5-day trial on our site, sabersim.com, to get signed up and check us out for a free 5 days. In the meantime, thank you for watching and good luck.